One of the reasons why we play games is because of the story, but some games really want to give the spotlight to the gameplay and graphics over the narrative, and that's what we're talking about today. Hi folks, welcome to CryptoMac. I'm Adam, and here are some of the best games with bad, average, or kind of thin stories, but features some of the most incredible gameplay experiences. Starting off at number 15, we have the Monster Hunter series. They often refer to these kinds of games as living games, right? Games that are more for the gameplay and the multiplayer aspects and meant to evolve over time rather than tell some sort of great epic story. And that's absolutely what Monster Hunter is. There's like a bare bones plot here and there to kind of string you along, to kind of be your justification for going out into some biomes and hacking up some giant lizard monsters to collect their parts to make new armor and weapons. The weaponsmithing and the weapon part system and the gear system in Monster Hunter are incredibly fun, incredibly addictive, and all the skill-based, multiplayer-oriented gameplay is just damn good. If you've played with a couple of friends and taken down a monster for the first time, you've never experienced anything like it. I remember the first time I did that in Monster Hunter Freedom Unite, I was having the time of my life. Along with that extensive crafting system, there's also plenty of things to do in kind of your hub areas like collecting cats, hiring them, training them, cooking a big meal. All of that stuff is super fun. The living, breathing, feeling ecosystems and biomes that play into where and how you hunt the monsters are incredibly cool, but the story has always just been a pretty flat one. Yes, there are characters, there are NPCs. Sometimes there's even like a big threat to the village to try and halfway anchor this thing as a more traditional narrative, but it never really is much to write home about. The more recent Monster Hunter games may have a bit more lore compared to the previous games in the series, but when it comes to the overall story, well, this franchise is just too thin to even be said to have a story. Next at number 14, it's Ninja Gaiden 2 Black. The Ninja Gaiden games are some of the finest action games out there. They feature intense hack-and-slash combat, incredible fast reflex-dependent combat that's just absolutely awesome. That easily makes up for what is like a really over-the-top and silly story. Now, don't get me wrong, I love me some over-the-top campy action movie kind of stories, and Ninja Gaiden really scratches that itch, but I'll still be the first to admit it, it's not the most engaging or captivating narrative experience. The story follows the badass ninja Ryu Hayabusa as he battles demons and dark forces threatening the world. It's pretty simple, it's kind of a save-the-world narrative structure, but it really is just a means to an end. Thankfully, the gameplay is what makes Ninja Gaiden so badass. The combat is incredibly satisfying, challenging, and enthralling, and the many levels full of tons of enemies to chop up and kill are just so fun. It features also some pretty varied environments, but how Ryu goes through it, the story, the journey, conquering multiple forces, culminating in a final showdown, is quite forgettable. Now, honestly, I know a few people who remember the plot points, and I'm one of them, but still, like I said, it's pretty forgettable compared to the insane, high-flying, deadly ninja combat gameplay. Ninja Gaiden 2 is just a great game for those who love a challenge, like a skill-based kind of hack-and-slash action game necessarily. Just don't go in expecting a super deep narrative experience. And at number 13, it's honestly almost every Super Mario game. I mean, let's face it, that's not really why we're here. This is a weird example since the Mario games don't really try that hard to ever really have a story in the first place. And when they do try to go for a little bit more structure, like in Super Mario Galaxy, the results are just incredible. But in general, the Mario games are not really there for the story. They're there for the gameplay, the incredible graphics, the music, really the presentation. I mean, let's face it, Mario games have given us some of the most groundbreaking gameplay ideas and really just games industry-defining moments ever. Mario really is what made 2D platforming, and the Mario 64 is what pushed 3D platforming, and thanks to both of those, we wouldn't have gaming as we know it as a whole today. But like I said, they're all missing one thing, a captivating story. Because let's face it, all Mario games have about the same amount of narrative one can expect. Though not all games in the franchise are about Bowser kidnapping the princess and Mario, rescuing her, all other games have the basic plot lines like collecting something, saving someone, etc. You get my point. But again, Super Mario games are great, and we can't deny that. Mario is one of the iconic faces that built the gaming we experience right now. Next, over at number 12, it's Dragon's Dogma 2. It's a game that wowed a lot of people when it was released, despite the rocky launch and the kind of lame Capcom-supported microtransactions. But thankfully, they did rework some elements of that. It's still not perfect, but what is arguably damn near perfect in this game is the gameplay loop, the gameplay experience, exploring Dragon's Dogma 2's crazy open world, climbing up on top of massive monsters and hacking them up, killing things, progressing through this world, getting better loot, getting better weapons. Experiencing cool, unscripted things out in the open world is what Dragon's Dogma 2 is all about. Sure, there's a fun fantasy setup, of course. Sure, there's a few moments throughout, a few characters here and there, but it's not really super memorable. It's not like one of the reasons people are talking about Dragon's Dogma 2. That's not to say the story is bad by any means. The premise of certain things, certain big late game over the top fantasy things are great, but a lot of your journey through this world, the kind of smaller character encounters, smaller quests, just aren't really the most interesting general fantasy sort of things you'll experience in video games. For somebody like me, it didn't bother me, and I know a lot of people who it didn't even bother, but going over Dragon's Dogma 2 and really looking over everything and looking at all the ways it benefits you as a player. An engaging story really isn't one of them, at least not as much compared to the gameplay or some of the visuals. Next, at number 11, we have Borderlands 3. Now, the Borderlands series is known for its unique blend of first-person shooting and loot-based gameplay. The series is absolutely looted, and of course, when you wrap all of that together, it's really about the gameplay. It's about going through this world, hacking up a bunch of dudes, and collecting all of the varied guns you can get your hands on. It's a good gameplay loop, and the Borderlands games honestly do it really, really well. Sure, the humor in the crazy cartoonish world really does feel pretty fresh and fun to explore, but it's the experience of shooting and looting that makes these classics. Unfortunately, Borderlands 3 is often considered one of the weaker entries in the series, mainly due to its storyline. The story in Borderlands 3 really takes a pretty sharp decline in quality compared to the previous games, in some people's opinions. The humor feels forced, the new characters fall flat, and the pacing is inconsistent, to put it lightly. The main villains are not as memorable or compelling as Handsome Jack from Borderlands 2, the standout villain of the series, honestly, so it makes the overall narrative feel very lackluster. Despite its weaknesses, Borderlands 3 pretty much still delivers on the main objective, the shooting. The world of ruining it, the diverse weapons, the gear, and all the crazy badass skills to pop off on enemies alongside the cool art style is good enough for us. Next, over at number 10, it is Just Cause 4. Just Cause 4 is an open-world action-adventure game that follows Rico Rodriguez as he fights against a private military organization known as the Black Hand. The story itself is pretty generic, a civil war, a rebellion, a classic dictatorship type thing. There are plenty of games that have this kind of global threatening storyline that players must fight against, so it's nothing new. The overall structure, the progression, the meetups with characters, and introduced factions and stuff like that are barely competent and just not really interesting. Everything in this game just feels dull, lifeless even, and unremarkable, while the characters are just very, very bland. Even the main protagonist, Rico, is so forgettable here, besides the cool leather jacket and shades. I mean, sure, it's an open-world game. Usually, open-world games don't have the most thrilling stories. Typically, it's more about the gameplay and the explosions and the chaos. And thankfully, this game nails that stuff. Specifically, a good, strong suit for the Just Cause series is the chaotic, physics-based open-world destruction that you can cause. The grappling hook/parachute combo, the many vehicles, the world's variety, and the zone's various enemy compounds, forts, and bases that can all be exploded, toppled, and destroyed. All of that in Just Cause 4 is extremely fun. It's just, once again, coupled with one of the most generic run-of-the-mill stories we've ever seen in an open-world game. Next, over at number 9, we have Stellar Blade. Now, this game is known as a post-apocalyptic action-adventure game, and it came out in 2024 to an unexpected amount of praise. The gameplay, the protagonist character design, and the music were all standout things, but another thing that was really talked about as well is the story. The game focuses on the journey of protagonist Eve battling these alien creatures that have invaded the world and forced humanity from the face of the earth. While the game is praised for its engaging combat and fast-paced action, unfortunately the story is seen as derivative and uninspired, as at first it does feel like a mix-up of elements from previous iconic games like the Nier series and, more specifically, Nier Automata, and I say that as like a pretty huge Nier fan. Honestly, I didn't care. I didn't come to this game for the story. I was impressed by the visuals. I was impressed by the action and the incredible boss fights and the graphics, so it was a win for me. But thankfully, most people have said that as the game goes on, the story does get a little bit more interesting with more unique gameplay elements, which is absolutely worth pointing out. But still, the general consensus here is just that the story is not something to write home about, but thankfully, the gameplay, visuals, presentation, and music are. And next over at number 8, it is Kingdom Hearts 3. Now, Kingdom Hearts 3 is a game that combines the charm of Disney with the depth of a real ambitious Square Enix RPG. You'd think that would be enough to satisfy fans of both worlds with an action-oriented RPG game, but unfortunately, it's actually considered to have one of the most convoluted and confusing stories in the entire series. Now, the previous Kingdom Hearts games have already been criticized for their complex and hard-to-follow narratives, and Kingdom Hearts 3 takes this problem to the next level. I'm going to be honest, as someone who played all these games growing up with the first one, I can definitely say that they kind of lost me. The plot jumps unpredictably between the Disney World's original characters, the over-the-top Square Enix Final Fantasy-like characters, all with a bunch of different storylines, and each with its own kind of lore, complications, and references. So for somebody, if you're not familiar with like even some of the deeper cut tie-in Kingdom Hearts games, which a lot of people have not played, people really are left brushing over a lot of story events. While the gameplay is actually pretty fun and faithful, it's why so many people kind of really didn't know what was going on. They just chose to enjoy the gameplay, the characters, and the adventure, and ignore the story. And I think there's something to be said for that, but we're gonna move on. Now, next up at number 7, for a little lighthearted one on the list, we have Crash Bandicoot. Now, Crash Bandicoot is arguably beloved by lots of old gamers like us. It's easy to love the adorable characters, the simple gameplay, yet engaging presentation. The music, sound effects, and look of the original Crash Bandicoot trilogy and even the games that followed have been great. The levels, the challenges, and the varied biomes and stuff make it feel like a grand adventure with a lot of unique elements to it. However, it's worth pointing out that despite all of the great things about this franchise, the narrative, the story, is or can be considered very bland, very simple. Yes, it is an old school franchise at heart and not really meant to be taken super seriously, but there's nothing wrong with seeking a more in-depth plot in the story you experience in a game. This isn't really a feature, it's more of an inevitable complaint from some fans that it doesn't have a little more going on. The storyline itself is a simple battle between Crash Bandicoot and his friends who are trying to stop Dr. Neocortex and his various evil plans. It's great and charming. We love these cartoonish characters despite the story not being incredibly compelling. In fact, there are plenty of games like this where the story isn't really that important at the end of the day, but as a list like this, we really kind of seek out stories you can fully immerse yourself in or get lost in, and Crash Bandicoot didn't really have that. Next, at number 5, it's Far Cry 5. Now, while the Far Cry games, look, we will say they're not like known for their stories. One thing at least that was worth pointing out was that at least to Far Cry 2, 3, and 4, they actually seem like they did have some themes, some stuff kind of going on, iterating on each gameplay system. There was at least some sort of idea behind the storytelling, and it was really good and easy to get invested in. Far Cry 2, 3, and 4 actually were really strong games for this, and then came 5, and on paper, it sounded fascinating. A crazy doomsday cult in Middle America and you stopping them. But the storytelling that kind of lays between that, kind of like the connective tissue that probably should have really fleshed that out and made it interesting or exciting or even a little controversial, is incredibly lacking, muddy, and like maybe even confused. Over the course of the game and your journey through Hope County taking on the Eden's Gate Doomsday cult, the themes of the story and the messages that they try to lay out are all over the place, and the writing didn't really feel as strong as previous Far Cry games here, and it ended with, without spoiling, just a flat-out, honestly lame resolution. While this was probably a disappointment to many, it doesn't change the cold hard fact that Far Cry 5's gameplay is still a really strong open-world Far Cry game. Now, at number 4, it's DMC Devil May Cry. Now, this one is a controversial entry in the Devil May Cry series, and it attempted to reboot the franchise with a fresh and original take on the original characters. So, long story short, a lot of Devil May Cry fans didn't really like this new kind of style and approach it went with, but look, for the purposes of this video, it really does stand out because the story was not too well regarded. People didn't really like the story, they didn't like this new version of Dante, but something that all the fans that actually play this game generally agree on is that it's still pretty stylish and freaking fun to play, And if you can get it on a new generation of consoles where it all runs at like a really silky smooth frame rate, there's a really fun, fast-paced depth to this combat that feels satisfying. Listening to the developers talk about it, they did do a really good job of explaining that they understood what goes into a Devil May Cry game from a combat point of view, and they nailed it. It's just all the stuff around it, some of the level design, some of the characters, the writing, the presentation that a lot of die-hard Devil May Cry fans weren't super into. But still, we wanted to point this one out. It's worth talking about. And next at number 3, it's Bulletstorm. Bulletstorm is really good for its gameplay and its scoring system that makes the game super fun to play and actually incredibly inventive, really, really creative. But the story, unfortunately, is incredibly lame. The game follows the host of Grey, a badass exiled commander who ends up having to fight his way through a planet of demented mutants. While it sounds pretty simple and yet action-packed and fun, it really is. Everything looks pretty good on paper, but the themes, the jokes, the crass dialogue can only go so far. Not to mention how forgettable both the characters and overall plot are. But to be fair, the gameplay is really good in Bulletstorm. To be honest, like the way you can throw your enemies around and shoot them in a varied way, score points, and invent new ways to destroy enemies and rack up a high score, it's really, really addictive. It's very simple, it's straightforward, but it just works. And it's a shame that really all you have in this game from like a story perspective, tethering everything together, is a few dark themed jokes here and there. It's pretty hard to be immersed in the world or really get to know any of the characters. But if we're talking about the gameplay and mechanics, Bulletstorm really delivered. And next, we're over at number 2, we have the Doom series. Doom is one of the most successful and influential games in history, a classic that paved the way for the first-person shooter genre we all know and love today. The gameplay, the weapons, the power-ups, the monsters, the music, everything truly made a revolutionary title and has earned its place as a classic. And of course, over time, the game just gave so many things that influenced many games today, or at least just good design decisions that made sense and work. But of course, they had to sacrifice one thing: the story. Yeah, there is a little foundation here, but it's literally just a dude against demons. This is about as simple as it gets. Modern Doom games for the last decade at least have definitely done a better job with this, but sometimes that simplicity in the original Doom is what just makes it great. It's such a simple premise that you can go absolutely crazy from there. You, a guy, a gun, demons all over the place, blood, gore, viscera, you name it. Like, what else makes it more complicated than that? And personally, what the Doom games are offering right now is more than enough. It's great, and while the story is undeniably thin, we can't deny that this franchise has a special place in our hearts as one of the greatest FPS in the gaming history. And finally, at number 1, we have The Last of Us Part 2. This game is really controversial in my opinion. When The Last of Us released in 2013, the impact was undeniable. Aside from the amazing visuals that were cutting edge at the time especially, the quality of the charming, relatable, memorable characters, there was also a pretty solid story, at least in our opinion, presented in such a realistic way that a lot of people actually argued that it set a new standard for narratives in games. So, of course, a sequel was inevitable, but unfortunately with The Last of Us Part 2, it did not quite do a story as compelling as the first one. Now, the narrative some people found to be disjointed and inconsistent. It jumps back and forth between multiple characters, timelines, making it really hard for just some people to follow and really just connect emotionally. Additionally, some of the plot twists and character arcs felt kind of forced and controversial. Now look, that's a long-winded way of saying some people just didn't really like the story in this one. Whether you did, your cousin did, your best friend did, I did, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Some people just didn't like it. Still, even with some people not digging the story, what is undeniable here, and the reason why we're making this point at all, is that even those who feel this way about the narrative still could not deny the quality of the graphics and the gameplay. It ultimately is one of the most engaging linear third-person shooters you can get your hands on. But those are at least some games with stories that faltered and often flat out suck, but sometimes it's just divisive, but still, the gameplay, the graphics, or the soundtrack is really, really great. Let us know in the comments how you feel about these games. If you like this video, clicking the like button helps us out. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.